My sister tore the check in half twice and dropped the pieces into the gravy boat. Right there at my mother's 92nd birthday dinner, in front of 14 members of our family, with the candles still smoking on the cake. The check was made out to me. It was signed in my mother's careful schoolteacher hand, and it was written for $3.4 million. Mom, honey, my sister said, patting her hand like you would pat a confused child. You do not have this money. You have a little house and a social security check, and it is cruel of some people to let you play pretend. The whole table laughed. Not mean laughter, friends, which is somehow worse. Comfortable laughter. The laughter of people who have already decided what an old woman is worth. And my mother, 92 years old, in her good blue cardigan, did not argue. She watched the pieces settle into the gravy, and she folded her napkin, and she said 5 quiet words that nobody at that table understood except me, and I did not understand them until morning. Well, now I know for certain. At 7:40 the next morning, my phone rang. It was a man from Farmers and Merchants Bank, a man whose title was Senior Branch Manager, and a man my mother had apparently known for 30 years. And after he confirmed who I was, he said 3 words that changed the rest of my life. Bring the pieces. Now, I know exactly what is happening in your head right now because it happened in mine, so let me make you 3 promises before we go one step further. First, yes, the check was real, every dollar of it, and before this story is over, you will know exactly how a woman who washed out bread bags and dried them on the faucet came to have $3.4 million that her own children never suspected. Second, the tearing of that check was not the tragedy of this story. The tearing was the test. It was designed, friends, and the person it was designed by watched it happen with her hands folded and took notes. And third, there is a $50 bill in this story, taped inside the cover of an old ledger since 1992, and when you find out what it was doing there, I promise it will hit you harder than the millions. And when my own family drags a 92-year-old woman in front of a judge to prove she is out of her mind, you are going to hear what she carried into that courtroom in her purse. My name is Glenda, I am 58 years old, and my mother raised me to return what is not mine. It turned out to be the most expensive lesson she ever taught, and the most valuable one. And this is the story of how those became the same thing. To understand the check, you have to understand the woman. And to understand the woman, you have to understand what our family thought was funny. My mother's name is Lucille, and for 60 years in our town, her thrift was a running joke with her own children in the front row. She washed bread bags and hung them over the faucet to dry. She used a tea bag twice and then set it on a saucer for later, and later always came. She wore the same gray wool coat for 26 winters and had it relined once, and when my sister teased her about it, Mom said the coat was not done yet, and she meant it. Her Christmas presents came wrapped in the Sunday comics, ironed flat from last year. She lived in the same little 2-bedroom house on Cherry Lane that she and my father bought in 1959, with a kitchen so unchanged that the flour canister still had a price sticker on it. 19 cents, friends. The flour canister cost 19 cents, and every one of those facts got trotted out at family dinners the way you would show off a trained dog. Mom, tell them about the tea bags. Mom still has the coat, everybody. Mom, you know they make new wrapping paper every year. And my mother would smile and let them have their fun, and I want you to remember that smile, friends, because I spent 50 years reading it wrong. I thought it was patience. It was accounting. There were 3 of us at that table who mattered to this story. My sister Rhonda, 4 years older, who married a man named Stan with a boat, a timeshare, and opinions about money that were always louder than his balance. Me, Glenda, the younger one, and my mother presiding over her own diminishment with her hands folded, taking attendance. I want to be fair to Rhonda before we go on, because this channel tells things straight or not at all. Rhonda was not a monster. She remembered birthdays. She could be generous when generosity had an audience. But somewhere along the way, my sister had filed our mother under finished. A little old woman with a little old house, someone to be managed, humored, and eventually liquidated. And the worst part, friends, is that she would have told you she was being loving, and she would have passed a polygraph. Contempt wears a lot of costumes. Its favorite one is concern. 2 pictures so you can see it plain, and then we move on. Picture 1, Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. My mother is at the head of the table she set for 40 years, and Stan is holding forth about her future as if she is a property with a tenant problem. The little house is worth something now, he says, with the neighborhood turning over. Sell it, get her into assisted living, split what is left while she is still around to watch us enjoy it. While she is still around to watch us enjoy it. He said that friends over her own sweet potatoes at a volume that assumed she was already gone. And my mother passed him the rolls and said, "More butter, Stan?" And I caught her eye for half a second, and something in there was not hurt at all. Something in there was writing it down. Picture 2, her 90th birthday. Rhonda gave her a gift, and the gift was a brochure, glossy, trifold, a place called Sunrise Meadows, with a photograph of two silver-haired models laughing at a salad. "We just want you safe, Mom." My mother thanked her and set the brochure under her coffee cup as a coaster, and used it as a coaster every day after, until the salad ladies were nothing but rings. That, friends, was my mother's entire style of warfare, and nobody in my family ever noticed they were losing. And one more picture, because this one has a fuse in it that burns all the way to the end of the story. Every year, usually around tax time, Stan would bring up the swamp. The swamp was the family's name for 84 acres of scrub ground out past the county line that my father left behind when he died, land too wet to farm on one end and too stony on the other, and Stan brought it up the way you bring up a relative's embarrassing hobby. "Lucille, you are still paying taxes on that swamp. It is throwing good money after bad. Let me make some calls. I know a fellow. We could get you something for it and be done." And every single year, my mother would stir her coffee and say the same 7 words, pleasant as a hymn. "I believe I will keep it, Stan." It became a family joke, friends, Mom, and her swamp, the punchline right next to the tea bags, and I laughed along with everyone else. God forgive me, because I did not know yet that I was laughing at the fuse. You need to understand where that land came from, and where she came from, because my mother did not fall out of the sky at 92 holding a checkbook. Lucille was born in 1934, a farm girl in a house where the Depression never really ended, one of 6 children and the only daughter, which in that time and place meant her childhood had a job description. She told me once, not sadly, just factually, the way she said everything, that she owned 2 dresses until she was married, and that her wedding shoes were her cousin's, stuffed at the toe with newspaper. She married my father in 1955, a quiet man who fixed farm equipment and paid cash his whole life, and she spent 31 years as a teacher's aide at the elementary school, wiping noses and drilling multiplication tables for a wage that would embarrass a paper route. And then, in 1976, when I was 8 years old, my father lay down after supper with a headache and never stood back up. And my mother was a widow at 42 with 2 daughters, a mortgage with 9 years left on it, and a funeral to pay for. I remember pieces of that season the way you remember weather. Casseroles on the porch. The coat, already old then, going to church every day of that first winter. And I remember, though I did not understand it until 50 years later, the Sunday my father's brothers came to the house with their hats in their hands and their advice loaded. They sat at her kitchen table, friends, 2 grown men explaining to a widow what she could not manage, and the list of what she could not manage was everything. "Sell the house, Lucille. Get something smaller. Sell Roy's truck and his tools. We will handle it for you. Take the weight off. And that ground out by the county line, that is nothing but a tax bill with weeds on it. Sign it over to us, and we will deal with the headache. Family helps family." I was 8, doing homework on the stairs, and I remember my mother's voice coming through the kitchen door, level as a floor, saying, "Thank you both for coming. I believe I will keep the house. I believe I will keep the truck until I have sold it myself. And I believe I will keep the ground." They pushed, friends. Of course they pushed. Men like that always push. And somewhere in the pushing, one of them said the sentence she repeated to me 60 years later with her eyes gone flint. He said, "Lucille, be sensible. What is a woman alone going to do with 84 acres of nothing?" And my mother said, "I suppose I'm going to find out what nothing is worth, if a person can wait." Then she leased the hay rights to a neighbor named Kowalski for enough to cover the taxes with a little left over, shook his hand at the fence line, and let the whole county forget that ground existed, including eventually her own daughters. 50 years, friends. Hold the swamp in your mind for 50 years the way she held it in hers. Now me. I am not going to polish myself up for you, because the truth works better. I was not a saint at her feet. I was just there. Every Saturday morning for 30-some years, groceries and the blood pressure cuff and the crossword she pretended she had not already finished. I drove her to the eye doctor and the foot doctor and the funerals, so many funerals, all her friends going one by one while she stood at gravesides in the coat that was not done yet. I did it because she was my mother and Saturdays were ours, and I will not pretend there was strategy in it because there was not. That turns out to matter more than anything else in this story. And here is my own situation, friends, so you have the whole board. 2 years before that birthday dinner, I lost my husband Dale to a heart that quit at 61, out in the garage with the radio still playing. 34 years married. The medical bills from his last year came to $38,000 after the insurance got done explaining itself. And I was working the front desk at a dental office and paying those bills down the way you empty a lake with a coffee cup. My roof was 17 years past its warranty and leaking into a lasagna pan in the attic. The family knew all of it. Knowing was not the problem. It never is. Now, before the birthday, I need to give you 3 small things I had noticed about my mother over the years and politely filed away, the way you file things about people you love. You are going to need all three. Thing 1. Every first Tuesday of the month, my mother had an errand she never named. I offered to drive her 100 times. She took the senior van instead. To town, 2 hours, home by lunch, and when I asked, she said, "Oh, just my errand," in a voice that closed the subject like a drawer. Thing 2. On her keychain, between the house key and the mailbox key, there was a small, flat brass key with a number stamped on it. A key that fit nothing in that house because one bored afternoon in my 40s, I had tried it in every lock on the property. When I asked, she said it was for keeping her nose out of and smiled and refilled my coffee. Thing 3. Once a year, in January, an envelope came from a law office 2 towns over, heavy paper, typed address, and my mother would read it at the kitchen table with her glasses on, nod once like a woman approving a report, and file it in the roll-top desk she kept locked. The roll-top desk, friends. Hold on to that desk. The last 10 minutes of this story live inside it. I noticed all 3 things, and I asked all 3 times, and when she closed the drawer, I let it stay closed because I was raised that a woman's business is her business. My sister would have hired a locksmith. I am convinced my mother knew both of those facts better than we knew them ourselves. So, the birthday. But first, the 2 weeks before it, because hindsight turned those 2 weeks into a lit runway, and I walked down the middle of it seeing nothing. The first Tuesday of that October, my mother broke 50 years of habit and asked me to drive her on her errand. Me, friends, not the senior van. I nearly dropped the phone. She had me park outside Farmers and Merchants, told me to keep the motor running and my nose in my crossword, and went in with her purse held in both arms, and came out 35 minutes later looking like a woman leaving a good confession. When I asked, she said, "Just squaring things," and then, at the red light on Main, apropos of absolutely nothing, she asked me, "Glenda, if you knew you had one sentence left to say to this family, and you knew they would not believe it, would you still say it?" I laughed, friends, and said something clever, and drove her home and thought, what a funny old bird my mother is. One sentence they would not believe. She was drafting the check in her head at that red light, and I was checking my mirrors. And the Saturday before the birthday, doing her groceries, she put 2 things in the cart that were not on the list, a box of nicer napkins, and a little package of butterfly hair clips, girls' clips, and when I raised an eyebrow, she said, "For Piper, a girl who films everything should have her hair out of her eyes." Friends. I am going to let that sentence sit there, and you are going to make of it what I have made of it every night since, and neither of us will ever be able to prove a thing, because my mother took the answer with her, smiling. 92 years old, the 3rd Saturday in October, dinner at Rhonda's house because Rhonda hosts, Rhonda has the table for it, Rhonda says so every year. 14 of us, pot roast, her favorite, which Rhonda mentioned 4 times, and a bakery cake with buttercream roses, and my mother at the middle of the table in her good blue cardigan with her purse in her lap. She kept the purse in her lap, friends, all evening. I noticed and filed it. They did the toast. Stan did the joke about her outliving the warranty, which he does every year, and every year it is somehow about money. And then, after the cake, while the coffee was going around, my mother stood up. My mother never stood to talk. The table went quiet in stages, the way a fan slows down, and she looked down the table at all of us and said, "I am 92 years old, and I have sat at this family's tables for 70 years, and tonight I have something to give, and I would like witnesses." And she opened the purse, and she took out a plain white envelope, and from the envelope a single folded check, and she walked it down the table, past Rhonda, past Stan, past the grandchildren with their phones, and she put it in my hands and closed my fingers over it with both of hers, and her hands were warm and completely steady. "For the roof," she said, "and for Dale's bills, and for 30 years of Saturdays, Glenda, because you are the only one who never once looked at me and saw a bill coming due." Friends, I did not even get it unfolded. Rhonda was already out of her chair and reading it over my shoulder, and I felt her go still. And then I heard my sister laugh, and I want to describe that laugh honestly. It was relief. Whatever that number was, it was so large that it could not be real, and if it was not real, then nothing had been given, and if nothing had been given, then nothing had been lost, and the world still made sense with Rhonda at the middle of it. She took the check out of my hands, friends. Took it the way you take scissors from a toddler and held it up to the table like evidence. $3.4 million, she announced, and the number got the laugh she wanted. Mama's writing pretend checks now. 3.4 million, everybody, from a woman who reuses tea bags. And Stan, who I will remind you once appraised my mother's whole future over sweet potatoes, put on his gravest voice, the concern costume, and said, "This is actually not funny. This is a symptom. Writing checks like this, Lucille, this is exactly the kind of thing we talked about. And honestly, if there were real money, letting one daughter grab it while your faculties are going, that is elder abuse, and everyone at this table knows where money like that would belong. It would belong to the family." There it was, friends, both jaws of the trap in one breath. The money is imaginary, and also, it is ours. And then my sister, my only sister, looked our mother dead in the eye, said, "We are doing you a favor, sweetheart," and tore the check in half, and put the halves together, and tore them again, and dropped all four pieces into the gravy boat, where they went translucent in the drippings while 14 people watched. The table laughed again. Friends, that comfortable laugh. Somebody said, "Oh, Rhonda," but in the fond way, the way you scold a naughty favorite. And my niece's daughter, Piper, 15 years old, sitting at the end of the table, did not laugh. I noticed that and filed it, and thank God I did, because file that with me, friends. Piper does not laugh, and Piper's phone is out. It was pointed at the cake, I assumed, at Grandma's big moment, the way the young ones film everything. Remember Piper. Through all of it, my mother stood exactly where she had stood, hands folded on the back of her chair, watching her own gift dissolve in gravy. She did not flush. She did not tremble. She watched the way I have seen scientists watch things, and then she said it, the 5 words, to nobody and to everybody. Well, now I know for certain. And she picked up her purse and asked me, pleasant as a Sunday, to drive her home. It was getting late for her. The car ride was 11 minutes, and she talked about the pot roast being dry. Friends, that is all, the pot roast. Until we pulled into her driveway on Cherry Lane, and she gathered her purse and put her hand on the door, and then she stopped. And without turning around, she said, "Did you get the pieces?" And friends, here is the thing. I had. While the table was busy laughing, I had fished all 4 pieces out of that gravy boat with a serving spoon and wrapped them in my napkin and put them in my coat pocket, and I could not have told you why to save my life. It was not hope. $3.4 million was not a real number to me. I think, honestly, it was just that her handwriting was on them, and I have never once in my life been able to watch something with my mother's handwriting on it get thrown away. I said, "Yes, Mama, I got the pieces." And my mother nodded once, the way she nodded at the January letters, a woman approving a report, and she said, "Good girl," and went inside, and the porch light went on, and I drove home with a napkin full of gravy-soaked paper riding in my coat like a heartbeat, understanding absolutely nothing. I want to tell you about that night, friends, because the night between the tearing and the phone call is the part I have never told anyone. At my own kitchen sink, I unwrapped the napkin and rinsed the gravy off those 4 pieces one at a time, gentle as washing a wound, and I laid them out to dry on the counter. On a bread bag, friends. A washed-out bread bag, drying by my faucet, because I am my mother's daughter down to the plastic, and I did not even notice I had done it until it was done. And while the pieces dried, the phone rang, and it was Rhonda, and my sister's voice had that bright, busy tone she uses when she is filing the paperwork on a thing she did. "Quite a night," she said. "Listen, Glenda, do not encourage her about that check business. Stan thinks we should get her in for a scan, and honestly, if she starts up again about big money, just change the subject. We have to protect her from herself. Protect her from herself." I stood there looking at $3.4 million drying on a bread bag, and I said, "Good night, Rhonda," and for the first time in my life, I hung up on my sister. Then I sat at the table until well past midnight with the pieces in front of me, and I did the thing I had been raised never to do. I doubted my mother. I am ashamed of it now, friends, but you deserve the truth. Some cold voice in me, a voice that sounded a great deal like the whole rest of my family, whispered, "What if they are right? What if the sweetest woman you know is coming loose, and this check is the first thread?" I fell asleep in the chair arguing with that voice. The phone settled it, 7:40 the next morning, Sunday. Phone rings, a number I do not know, and a voice like a filing cabinet introduces itself. "Good morning, is this Glenda?" "This is Raymond Sowell, Senior Branch Manager, Farmers and Merchants Bank. I apologize for the hour and the day. I have known your mother a very long time, and she asked me to call you first thing, and to tell you 3 things exactly. The appointment is Monday at 10. Come alone, and bring the pieces." Friends, I sat down on my kitchen floor. Not fell. Saturday, deliberately, the way you do when your legs file for a recess, and I looked at the napkin bundle drying on my counter, and the whole night reassembled itself in one clean line. The purse in her lap, the witnesses, the watching, now I know for certain, did you get the pieces? She had not been humiliated at that table. She had been conducting. Monday at 10, I sat in a paneled office that smelled like toner and peppermint, and Raymond Sowell, 70 gray suit, reading glasses on a chain, laid a single account statement in front of me, turned it around with 2 fingers, and sat back. And there it was. Friends. Farmers and Merchants Bank. Private Client Services. Lucille, her full name, trust account. Balance $3,412,000 and change. And sitting in the corner chair where she had been the whole time, in the gray coat that was not done yet, with her purse in her lap, was my mother, watching my face the way she watched the check tear. Taking notes. You are not having a stroke, she said kindly. Raymond, get her the water. Here is where the money came from, friends, and I am going to give it to you the way she gave it to me, plain, because the plainness is the point. When my father died in 1976, he left her three things: the little house on Cherry Lane, a 12-year-old Buick, and 84 acres of scrub ground out past the county line, land his own family had called worthless for 2 generations, too wet to farm on one end, too stony on the other, good for nothing but hay and taxes. Her brothers-in-law told her to let it go for whatever it would fetch. One of them offered to take it off her hands himself, friends, as a favor, the way vultures do favors. And my mother, 42 years old, newly widowed, with 2 daughters and a funeral to pay for, looked at the men explaining her own business to her, and she said she believed she would keep it. She leased the hay rights for pennies to a farmer named Kowalski, and the pennies paid the taxes, and everyone forgot the land existed, including eventually her own children. For 40 years, friends, she kept a rectangle of dirt nobody wanted, because, and this is what she told me in that office, word for word, it was the one thing your father's family let me keep. On account of they thought it was nothing, I decided to find out what nothing was worth if a person could wait. And then, 7 years ago, the interstate exchange went in 11 miles south, and the logistics people came sniffing up the county for flat acreage near the ramp, and it turns out scrub ground you cannot farm is exactly the ground you can pour a warehouse on. $2.15 million, friends, for the nothing. And she never told a soul except Raymond's soul and a lawyer 2 towns over, and she put it in a trust, and it grew, quiet as she was, alongside 60 years of a teacher's aide's saved dimes that had already, all by themselves, become more than any of us would have believed. The first Tuesday errands, the brass key, a safe deposit box, this bank, the January letters, her trust review. 50 years, friends, I read that smile at the dinner table as patience. It was compound interest. And I have to give you Raymond Sowell's side of it because 30 years deserves a paragraph. He told me while my mother pretended not to listen that she had interviewed him in 1996, not the other way around. That she had come in with a shoebox of certificates and a list of questions on the back of a seed catalog and grilled him for an hour about fees, and at the end of it she said, "You will do, young man, but I will be checking your arithmetic," and she had, friends, every first Tuesday of every month for 30 years with a coffee cake. He said, "In 3 decades of private clients, doctors, farmers, car dealers, your mother is the only one who never once made an emotional decision with $1 in her hand. We use her file to train the new officers. We just changed the name. They use my mother to train bankers, friends, the woman my family was laughing at over the gravy. I asked her the question you are asking right now. Why keep it secret? Why sit in that little house rewrapping Christmas paper with millions in the bank while Stan appraised your future over the sweet potatoes?" And my mother took off her glasses and folded them and gave me the sentence that this whole story hangs from, so take it slow. Money is a spotlight, Glenda. The minute you turn it on, everybody starts performing. I kept it dark all these years because I wanted to keep watching the show nobody knew they were putting on. And then she nodded at the napkin bundle in my lap. Last night was the final act. Now, the check. She had Raymond take the pieces, all 4, gravy stains and all, and he unfolded them with a kind of bank tenderness, friends, and flattened them under glass like a museum man, and my mother said, "That one is void, of course. I did not write it to be cashed. I wrote it to be read." And I said, "Read by who, Mama?" The whole table saw the number, and my mother smiled the accounting smile one more time and said, "Not the number, honey. Checks do not test the person they are written to. They test everyone standing behind her. I have known for years what you were. Last night, I needed to see the rest of them all at once, with the money on the table and the gravy getting cold, and now I have seen it. And Raymond, I believe we can proceed." Proceed, friends. Hold that word, because before we find out what proceed meant, I want to stop right here, halfway down this road, and talk to you directly for 1 minute. If you have ever been the one who did the Saturdays, the quiet one, the one who showed up without an invoice while the loud ones circled the estate, I want to hear from you tonight. So tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your Saturdays looked like, because I read every single one of them with my morning coffee, and I answer more than you would think. And if this story has its hooks in you, do me the 2-second kindness, press the like button and subscribe with the bell, because you are exactly at the halfway mark, friends, and the second half is the courtroom, the ledger, and the $50 bill, and I promise you the $50 bill is the one that will stay with you. All right, here is what proceed meant. It meant that within a week, her attorney, a precise woman named Renata Oakes from the heavy January envelopes, had restructured everything. The roof, Paid, a crew on it by Thursday, and my mother came and sat in a lawn chair in my yard and supervised friends, 92 years old, pointing at flashing with her cane. Dale's bills, $38,000 of them, gone, paid directly, and I cried at my kitchen table over a receipt, which Dale would have found hilarious, and that is exactly why I cried. And the rest, the millions, went where torn fingers could not reach, into the trust with its papers in order, with me named where she wanted me named, and everything witnessed, notarized, and copied in triplicate. Because, as my mother put it, we are about to poke a wasp nest wearing short sleeves, and I intend to have my affairs in a condition that would bore a judge to death. She said that in September. Friends, mark it, because here is how the wasps found out. It was the county deed records that did it in the end. Stan could not sleep on it, apparently, the pretend check with its very specific number, and pretend checks do not have specific numbers. And so one night he did what anyone can do and pulled the property records and found the 2018 land sale sitting in the public record where it had sat for 7 years, $2.15 million from a logistics company to my mother, notarized, recorded, and ignored by everyone who was sure they already knew what she was worth. The phone tree lit up like a switchboard, friends. And I want you to guess what arrived at my mother's little house within 72 hours. Casseroles. 3 of them. My sister, who had visited 4 times in 2 years, came twice in 1 week, with tulips, with photographs of the grandchildren, with a voice I had not heard since we were girls, warm as a heating pad, and my mother received all of it graciously and returned the casserole dishes washed, because she was raised right and counted everything because she was Lucille. I got my own version of the warmth that week. And I want to walk you through the phone call because there is a translation exercise in it that some of you need for your own kitchens. Rhonda called on a Wednesday evening, and for 4 full minutes it was 1975 again. Do you remember the lake trips? We should do sisters' lunch. I have been thinking about Dale. How are you really? 4 minutes, friends. I timed it with the oven clock because by then I had learned to listen past the upholstery for the frame underneath. And at minute 5 came the downshift, the small businesslike settling of the voice, the sound of pleasantries being cleared away like dishes, and my sister said, and Glenda, about Mom's situation. Her situation. 3 days earlier, it had been her delusion. Now it was her situation. And situations, friends, in families like mine, are things that get managed by committees you are not on. We just think, Rhonda said, and I noted the we, that with that kind of money in play, everything should be looked at fresh. The trust, the beneficiaries, all of it, as a family, so that nobody, and hear her voice put on its gentlest shoes, so that nobody can ever accuse you of anything, honey, so that nobody can ever accuse you. There it is, friends, the finest threat ever dressed as a favor, and if you have heard it in your own kitchen, put the word heard in the comments because I want to know how many of us got that exact sentence. I told her the trust had a lawyer, the lawyer had a phone number, and I had a pie in the oven. There was no pie, friends. There was just a woman learning, one call at a time, that no is a complete sentence and that it bakes at any temperature. And then came the family meeting. They called it Sunday dinner, but there were folders, friends. When you arrive at a dinner and there are folders, you are not at a dinner. Rhonda had gathered the cousins, the aunts, Stan at the head of the table with his reading glasses pushed up on his head like a man about to explain the market, and they sat my mother down with pot roast, again with the pot roast, and made their presentation, a power of attorney, comprehensive, naming Rhonda and Stan jointly, just to protect you, Mom. The Sunrise Meadows brochure, back from the dead, laminated this time. And a suggestion, made with 4 smiles, that the trust be reviewed by the family's own advisor, meaning Stan's golf friend Gary, because independent eyes were healthy. My mother listened to the whole pitch with her hands folded, friends, and when it wound down, she dabbed her mouth and delivered 3 sentences that should be carved somewhere. She said, I have had this money for 8 years, and you have known about it for 8 days. And in that time, only one of us has torn up $3.4 million in a fit of certainty. She said, I will not be signing anything today or ever that I did not draft first. And then she stood and picked up her purse and said, the pot roast was dry again, dear. It wants a lower oven, and walked out to my car at the curb where I was waiting. Because by then, friends, I was always waiting at the curb. I wish I could tell you it ended there, with a dry pot roast and a mic drop. You know it did not. You have met people like Stan. 3 weeks later, a woman from Adult Protective Services knocked on my mother's door, kind, careful, and obligated, because someone, anonymously, had reported an elderly woman in the county being financially exploited by a caregiver daughter, isolated from her family, exhibiting confusion, giving away large sums. I was there that morning, friends. It was a Saturday, and I want to give you the scene, because it deserves to exist somewhere on the record. The caseworker's name was Miss Alvarez, mid-30s, tired eyes, clipboard, a woman who has seen real horrors and has to knock on every door as if this one might be another. My mother sat her down at the kitchen table, served her coffee cake, the first Tuesday coffee cake, and said, "Before you begin, dear, I imagine your form has boxes. Let us fill the boxes." And then, friends, my 92-year-old mother conducted that welfare check herself. Today's date, the president, the season, counted backward from 100 by sevens without being asked, and then she named her medications, her doctor, her banker, her attorney, and the balance of her checking account to the dollar, and she slid across the table a folder she had prepared, because of course there was a folder containing her last two cognitive evaluations and Renata's card. Miss Alvarez looked through it, and looked at the coffee cake, and looked at me, standing at the counter with a dish towel like the alleged predator I was, and she closed the clipboard, and what she said on her way out, quietly, at the door, I will treasure until my last day. "Ma'am, most of my visits I am worried about the elder. This is the first one where I am worried about whoever filed the report. The complaint was closed within the month, but the report, friends, was never the weapon. The report was the ranging shot. Between the ranging shot and the artillery, Stan paid me a visit. And I need you to have this seen, because it is the one my family still swears never happened, and it happened in my own driveway. He came alone on a weekday evening in the good jacket, and he stood by my car with his hands in his pockets, doing casual the way heavy men do casual. And he laid it out for me in the voice he uses on golf partners and loan officers. "Glenda, this is all headed somewhere ugly, and it does not have to. You are not the enemy here. You are a reasonable woman. Here is what reasonable looks like. You sign a short statement. Our lawyer has it drafted, just saying you have noticed mom slipping. Little things. Everybody notices little things. The trust gets set aside. The money comes under family management, and you walk away with a full equal share, no hard feelings, everybody wins." And then he leaned on my car, friends, on Dale's old car, and delivered the other half, the half the concern costume always carries in its inside pocket. Or, he said, "You can stay stubborn, and we go to a judge, and win or lose. Every neighbor you have spends next year wondering what the quiet daughter did to get herself investigated. Mud is free, Glenda. It does not have to be true to stick." I want to tell you I said something for the highlight reel. The truth is, I looked at him for a long moment, and what came out quiet. I said, "Stan, my mother has been testing this family for 50 years, and you have failed every single round, and you have never even known you were playing. I am not signing your paper. Get off my car." He smiled the way men like Stan smile when the pitch dies, all lips, and said, "Your funeral," and drove off, and I stood in my driveway shaking like a paint mixer, friends, and then I went inside and I did what this family had finally taught me to do. I wrote it all down, word for word, with the date. Renata read my little kitchen affidavit later and said, "This is usable," and I thought, "Mama, look at me, keeping my own books at last." And the following Tuesday, a process server caught me in the dental office parking lot, and I stood between two parked cars reading a petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship of the person and estate of Lucille, filed by her loving daughter Rhonda and son-in-law Stan, alleging cognitive decline, alleging undue influence, alleging friends in paragraph 9, that the so-called birthday check incident demonstrated the proposed ward's detachment from financial reality. The check they tore up, friends, the check they laughed at. It was now Exhibit A in the case that she was crazy, filed by the people who tore it. I have been angry a few times in my life. That Tuesday in the parking lot, I learned what the real thing tastes like all the way down. And I want to be honest with you about the fear too, because the fear is the part these stories usually skip. Guardianship is not a slap fight, friends. It is the nuclear weapon of family law. If they won, my mother would become legally a child. Her money managed by Rhonda and Stan. Her address chosen by Rhonda and Stan. Hello, Sunrise Meadows. Her trust unwound as the product of a failing mind, and me, on the record forever, as the scheming caregiver who exploited her, a finding that would follow my name through that county for the rest of my life. And underneath all of it, the truly frightening part, the part I whispered to my own kitchen at 2 a.m. What if a judge looked at a 92-year-old woman who hid millions for decades while reusing tea bags and simply agreed that it was strange? Because it was strange, friends. Magnificent and strangeness is what they were counting on. I did not sleep much that season, and I want to describe those nights honestly for the women living them right now, because there are some of you in the comments every week. At 2 a.m, the enemy is not your sister. The enemy is the 50-year-old voice in your own head that was installed by the same people who filed the petition, and mine ran the old tapes on a loop. Maybe you should just settle this. Maybe a statement is not so much to sign. Maybe peace is worth more than being right. And every night I answered it the same way, friends. I got up and I went to the kitchen and I looked at four gravy stained pieces of paper, and I reminded myself that peace purchased by agreeing to a lie about somebody you love is not peace. It is just quieter warfare, with you switched to the other side. Then I went back to bed, and most nights, eventually, I slept. They had the concern costume, and the anonymous report, and the gravy stained exhibit. What we had, it turned out, was Lucille, and Lucille had been preparing for this exact fight since before her enemies knew it was possible. The Sunday after the papers came, she sat me and Renata Oakes down at her kitchen table, unlocked the roll-top desk with a little key from her ring, and began laying things out in rows, calm as a woman dealing solitaire. Item: a neurocognitive evaluation, complete, scored, signed by a geriatric specialist in the city, dated last October, and beneath it another, dated the October before, and another, 4 years of them, every autumn since she turned 88. I get my head examined every October, she said, the way you service a furnace before winter, not because I doubt the furnace, because I know the neighbors. Friends she had scored in the 95th percentile for her age group. On the most recent one, the doctor had written in the margin, and Renata read it out loud twice because it was going in a filing, patient-completed serial cognitive testing without error, and then corrected the examiner's arithmetic on an unrelated form. Item: a letter from Raymond Sowell, 30 years her banker, attesting to 3 decades of orderly, self-directed, frankly formidable financial management. Item: the trust documents, every amendment initialed, every review letter since the land sale, the January envelopes, friends, 7 years of them, each one proof that the plan predated the birthday, predated me knowing anything, predated every allegation in paragraph 9. And then she looked at the table and looked at us and said, it wants one more thing. It wants the dinner itself. A room full of my family will swear I sat there confused while a check was lovingly intercepted. It will be their 14 voices against my paperwork, and judges are human, and 14 is a large number. And that, friends, is when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Piper. 15-year-old Piper, my sister's granddaughter, the one who did not laugh, 4 words and an attachment. Aunt Glenda, I have it. She had filmed the whole thing, friends, start to finish, from the end of the table, steady as a tripod because she had wanted Grandma Lucy's big birthday speech for one of her little videos, and instead her phone had drunken the entire scene. The gift. The grab. Rhonda reading the number to the table like a punchline. The tearing all 4 pieces, the gravy. And the audio, friends, the audio was the guillotine because there was Stan's voice, rich and clear and utterly unaware of itself, saying the 11 words he had said with the concern costume on. If there were real money, it would belong to the family. Motive, friends, in his own baritone. Time-stamped. Piper brought it to me herself after school and sat at my kitchen table with her tea, 15 years old, scared and square-shouldered. And I want you to understand what it cost her, because courage that costs nothing is just opinion. Her own parents had told her to stay out of it. Grown folks' business, her father said, and her mother, Rhonda's daughter-in-law, had put it plainer, do not you dare embarrass your grandmother with that phone. And Piper sat at my table turning her mug in circles and told me about a Saturday 2 summers before when she was 13, and Great-Grandma Lucy had taught her to balance a checkbook at that same kitchen table on Cherry Lane, an actual paper checkbook, for a bank account with $11 in it, and had said to her, write it all down, Piper girl. Every dollar has a story, and the person who writes the story down is the person they have to believe later. She looked up at me, friends 15 years old, and said, I am the person who wrote it down, Aunt Glenda. Then she said the thing I will be quoting for the rest of my days. Grandma Rhonda keeps saying we are protecting Great-Grandma. But I was there. I filmed the only person at that table who needed protecting, and everybody who it needed protecting from, and they were all wearing party hats. The hearing was the 2nd week of February, and I did not sleep the night before, and neither, I found out later, did anyone else in this story except one person. My mother slept 9 hours, friends, and ate a soft-boiled egg in the morning and picked her purse up off the hall table the way a carpenter picks up a level. The courtroom was small, oak benches, radiators ticking, and our family sorted itself onto 2 sides of the aisle like the world's coldest wedding. Their attorney went first and painted the picture: the frail widow, the isolating caregiver, the erratic gift, the family's tender alarm, and I sat there listening to a version of my Saturdays in which I was a spider, and I kept my face level the way my mother had taught me at 100 dinners, and her hand found mine under the table, warm and completely steady. Then they put Rhonda on the stand. And friends, I want to be careful here because she is my sister and this channel does not deal in cartoons. Rhonda was not lying up there, not the way a con artist lies. She was testifying to the mother she had invented 40 years ago and had never once updated. The little old lady, the tea bags, the swamp, and she described the birthday as heartbreaking. Mom so confused, waving around an impossible check, and we had to act fast before someone took advantage. She believed it, friends. That was the tragedy sitting in the witness chair. She had laughed at the coat for so long she could no longer see the woman wearing it. And then Renata Oakes stood up for the cross and asked exactly one question. Mrs., she said, when you tore up what you believed was your mother's delusion, did you check with her bank first, or did 70 years of assumptions feel like enough? Objection, sustained, withdrawn, friends, it did not matter. The question was for the judge, and the judge had heard it. Then Renata Oakes stood up, and it was carpentry, friends. No flourishes, nail, nail, nail. 4 years of October evaluations entered. The specialist's margin note read aloud. 30 years of Raymond's soul entered, with Raymond himself in the second row in his gray suit, looking like the concept of fiduciary duty given a body. 7 years of trust reviews predating everything entered. And then, Your Honor, the family dinner in question has been characterized at length by the petitioners. We would like to play it. Friends, I have been to church my whole life, and I have never felt a room go as quiet as that courtroom went for those 4 minutes. 14 party hats. My mother standing with her purse, giving the speech, steady as a newscaster, the check traveling hand to hand. Rhonda's laugh, thin and enormous in the speakers, the tearing which sounded in that room like something structural failing, and then Stan's voice, saying it would belong to the family, while the judge's eyebrows made a note of their own. And when the video ended, the judge asked my mother if she would like to make a statement. And my mother said she would, thank you, and opened her purse. And I want you to know what she took out of it because I promised you at the beginning that this purse was loaded. She took out the torn check. The bank had returned it to her flattened under archival plastic, 4 gravy-stained pieces fitted back together like a jigsaw, and she held it up without a tremor and said the following, and this is verbatim, friends, because it is seared. Your Honor, my son-in-law tells this court I do not understand what money is. This is $3.4 million, and it was torn up at my birthday party by people who believed it was worthless because they believed I was. They were wrong about the check, and they have petitioned this court to make them right about me. I have managed my own affairs for 50 years without losing a dollar or a night's sleep. The only financial catastrophe in this family's recent history is floating in this plastic, and I did not commit it. I watched it, and I took excellent notes. The petition was denied from the bench, friends. Denied with language. The judge used the phrase troublingly inverted, as in the concerns for the proposed ward's welfare appear troublingly inverted as to their source, which is a judge's way of saying you called the fire department on the woman holding the extinguisher. Costs were assessed to the petitioners, and the APS file was closed with a notation my mother later got a copy of and, I am not exaggerating, considered framing. Allegations unsubstantiated. Ward, if anything, overprepared. Overprepared, friends. Put that on the coat that is not done yet. And I have to tell you what my mother did while the judge was still gathering his papers, because it is the single most Lucille thing that happened in 3 years of Lucille things. She opened her purse one last time, took out a small notebook and a pencil, licked the pencil the way women of her generation do, and made an entry. Right there at the table, friends, in front of God and the county. I looked over her shoulder, 2 columns, one said costs, one said recovered, and under recovered, in that careful schoolteacher hand, she had written one word, everything. The drive home was 11 minutes, the same 11 minutes as the birthday. Same roads, opposite direction in every way that counts. And my mother watched the town go by and said only one thing the whole ride. She said, your father would have enjoyed today. He always said I would win one big one eventually, he just thought it would be at bingo. And then she laughed, friends. My 92-year-old mother laughed like a girl at her own joke, with her purse in her lap and the torn check inside it in archival plastic. And if I close my eyes on hard days, I can still hear it, and I recommend collecting a sound like that from somebody you love while collecting is still possible. The town, of course, ran its own verdict alongside the counties. For a season, my family was the dinner theater of 3 church potlucks, and I will not pretend the sympathy all ran one direction, because a small town loves a fallen hostess almost as much as it loves a hidden fortune, and there were women who crossed the street for Rhonda and women who crossed it for me, and the 2 lines are still visible at the grocery store if you know where to stand. My mother's comment on all of it was 4 words, delivered over the crossword, let them keep busy. Rhonda and Stan left the courthouse by the side aisle. My sister looked at me once on the way out, and I have spent nights since trying to name what was in her face, and the closest I can come is this. It was the look of a woman who had finally, at 62, been introduced to her own mother, and did not recognize her, and understood in the same instant that this was nobody's doing but her own. 50 years of laughing at bread bags, while the most interesting woman she would ever meet sat across the table taking notes. Some griefs, friends, cannot be paid to anyone. You just carry them home in your good coat. Now, the ledger. The night after the hearing, my mother asked me to stay for supper, soup and toast at the little kitchen table on Cherry Lane, and after the dishes, she unlocked the roll-top desk again, and this time she took out something she had not shown the lawyers because it was never for the lawyers. An old green cloth ledger, corners gone soft as felt, and she set it in front of me and said, "Open the cover." Taped inside the front cover, friends, under a strip of yellowed cellophane tape, was a $50 bill, and beside it, in pencil, in her hand, a note. June 1992. Glenda gave it back. I looked up at her and I had nothing, friends, no guesses, and she poured the tea and told me. In the summer of 1992, I had spent a Saturday helping her wallpaper the back bedroom, and at the end of it, she had handed me a folded stack of bills for my trouble, and somewhere on my drive home, I had counted it and found an extra 50, far too much, obviously a mistake, and I had turned the car around and driven back and handed it to her at the door, and she had said, "Oh my, silly me," and that was the whole event. I had forgotten it entirely, friends. 34 years. She had not. It was not a mistake, she said, stirring her tea. There was never one mistake in my envelopes in 50 years. I overpaid every single person in this family exactly once. Your sister, 1988. Stan, twice, because I could not believe the first one. Both boys, your cousins, the aunts. Everyone got one envelope with too much in it, one quiet chance, no audience, no test they could see, which is the only kind of test that means anything. And then, friends, because I finally had the standing to ask, I asked her where it came from. Not the money, the testing. A person does not wake up one morning running 50-year experiments on her own family. Something teaches her to. And my mother looked into her tea for a while, and then she told me the only story of her girlhood I had never heard. In 1952, she was 18, and she had an egg money jar. 4 years of it, friends, selling eggs and mending for neighbors, saved dime by dime toward the teacher's college in the city, $41, which was a semester in those days, and she kept the jar behind the flour in her mother's pantry, where everyone knew it lived, because in that house, nobody imagined it needed hiding. And one October morning, the jar was empty, and her father was standing in the yard next to a used truck. He did not deny it, she said. That was the thing. He looked at me over the hood of that truck and said, "Your brother needs it for work, and work feeds this family, and what does a girl need with college? The family will pay you back." "The family," my mother said, setting her cup down with no sound at all, "is still paying me back, dear. I have simply learned to collect in information. 18 years old, friends, an egg jar, a truck, and a sentence. And out of those three things, a woman spent 70 years building a fortune nobody could find, and a family ledger nobody knew they were writing themselves into. Your father's people thought they married a quiet girl. They married an auditor with a broken heart, and only one person at any of those tables ever balanced." She turned the ledger around. Pages of it, friends. Dates, names, amounts. 2 columns, ruled in pencil, 50 years of it, and one column heading said given, and the other said returned. And the returned column, friends. The returned column had one entry, mine. "The check your sister tore," she said, "was the last test I will ever run, and I ran it for the witnesses so no one could ever say I chose you in confusion. But you were not chosen in October, Glenda. You were chosen in June of 1992 at my front door by your own hand when you were 34 years old and broke and did not know anyone was watching. Nobody ever knows anyone is watching. That is when people are true." I put my head down on my mother's kitchen table, friends, next to the green ledger, and I cried the way you cry when arithmetic turns out to have loved you your whole life. And my mother, 92 years old, patted the back of my head the way she did when I was 6 and said, "There now. You always were my best entry." She lived 3 more years, friends, and I want you to know they were the best ones, and I want to actually show them to you because stories like mine always sprint through the good part, and the good part was the point of everything. We took the trips. Do not let anyone tell you money cannot buy anything that matters, because at 93, my mother stood on a beach in South Carolina with her shoes in her hand and saw the Atlantic Ocean for the first time in her life. 93 years, friends, and no one had ever taken her. She stood at the waterline in the coat because, of course, she brought the coat with the wind moving her white hair, and she looked at all that water for a long while, and then she said, "Well, and I heard 50 years of tea bags in it. It does keep going, doesn't it?" And then she made us walk the beach so she could check what the hotels charged friends, because a woman does not stop being herself just because she is rich at the ocean. And at dinner, she scandalized the waiter by ordering the lobster and then wrapping half the breadbasket in a napkin for the morning. Both things were true of her at once, all the way to the end. That is the whole woman, and I would not sand off either edge for anything. There was one more visit in those years that I have to tell you about, because you have been waiting for it whether you know it or not. The spring before Mom passed, Rhonda's car pulled up to Cherry Lane on a Sunday while I was there doing the crossword, and my sister sat in the driveway for 4 full minutes before she came to the door. No folders, friends, no tulips, no committee, just Rhonda, looking every day of her age, holding a store-bought pound cake like a passport. They sat at the kitchen table, the two of them, and I made myself busy in the yard because some accounts want no witnesses, and I do not know most of what was said, and I have never asked. What I know is this. When Rhonda left, her eyes were wrecked and her spine was straighter than I had seen it in years, and on the seat of her car, in her own handwriting on a recipe card, was my mother's pot roast recipe. And across the bottom, in the careful schoolteacher hand, one line. It wants a lower oven, dear. You always rush it. That was the whole armistice, friends. No speeches, a recipe card. In my family, that is a treaty with seals on it, and I have chosen to count it because you take the entries you get. Piper came with us on that trip. Piper comes to everything now. She is 18, first year at the State University, accounting, friends, and I am fully aware of how funny that is, and her tuition is handled every cent from a fund my mother set up before she passed, though Piper did not know that until the first bill arrived, marked paid, with a note in the memo line, in wobbling but determined ink. For the girl who kept the receipts. Rhonda and I speak. I will not lie to this camera and dress it up as more than it is. It is Christmas cards, and it is standing at the same graveside, and once a year it is lunch, both of us careful as people carrying full bowls. The apology never came in words, friends. What came, the spring after the hearing, was a cardboard box on my porch with no note, and inside it, wrapped in dish towels, was the gravy boat. Scrubbed, polished, and empty. I have decided to count it. You take the entries you get. My mother died at 95, in October, of course October, in her own bed, in the little house on Cherry Lane, quiet as a balanced ledger, with the coat that was not done yet hanging by the door, done at last. I was the one who found her, on a Saturday, because Saturdays were ours, and I sat on the edge of her bed for a long while before I called anyone, and I am not going to describe that hour except to say that the house was very still, and the stillness was not empty. It was finished, friends. There is a difference, and I learned it in that room. The funeral filled the church, which would have both pleased and annoyed her, pleased at the arithmetic, annoyed at the florist's prices, and half the town came through the line telling me small stories I had never heard. The librarian she had quietly paid late fees for, other people's late fees, for years. 2 women from her old school who said Miss Lucille used to leave lunch money in desks and never once got caught. Kowalski's son, the hay farmer's boy, 60 himself now, who gripped my hand and said, "Every Christmas, an envelope, ma'am, every Christmas since 1976, and my dad never told a soul because she asked him not to. 50 years of entries, friends in a column none of us could see." The will held no surprises because she was Lucille, and she had bored the wasps to death with paperwork years before. The trust did what she built it to do. The scholarship exists now, friends, at the high school, 2 girls a year, and it is called the Lucille Fund for Students Who Keep Their Own Books, and the application requires, and I fought the committee to keep this line, a 1-page essay on something small you kept that turned out to matter. I read every application myself, at the kitchen table under the frame, and friends. The essays would take the roof off your heart. A girl who kept her father's work gloves after the plant closed. A girl who kept a bus transfer from the day her family arrived in this country. A girl who kept 3 years of babysitting money in a hollowed-out dictionary, and when I read that one, I had to go stand in the yard a while. They are out there in every generation. Friends, the keepers, the counters, the quiet ones with their jars behind the flour, and this family funds 2 of them a year now, forever, on interest from a piece of ground called nothing. My mother's revenge, in the end, was not the courtroom. It was compounding, friends. It is still compounding right now while you listen, in the savings accounts of girls she never met. And the roll-top desk came to my house, friends, because the will said so, one line, the desk and its contents to Glenda, who will know what to do with each drawer in time. In time, she wrote. So I have been opening one drawer a month on the first Tuesday, which is how she would have wanted it, and I will tell you what the first three held, and the rest belonged to me. The first drawer held the green ledger, which you know, and Piper's $11 checkbook, Friends, the paper one from the lesson at the kitchen table, kept like a relic. The second held 60 years of hay lease receipts from the Kowalskis, every Christmas envelope noted, and a photograph I had never seen. My mother at 18, standing in a farmyard beside a jar, unsmiling, with her chin set in a way I now recognize from a courtroom. She kept a picture of herself from the morning of the egg jar, Friends. She looked at the wound once a month for 70 years so she would never once forget the shape of it. And the third drawer held a letter with my name on it and two words under my name, Open in October. I obeyed, friends, of course I obeyed, and I will give you only the last lines because the rest is between my mother and me. The coat is yours. Do not have it relined again. It has one more good winter in it than people think, and so, dear, do you. Everything true I ever learned fit in 2 columns. Love people generously and write it all down. Your loving mother, Lucille. I wear the coat, friends. First Tuesday of every month to the bank, where a young officer they have assigned to me out of what I suspect is training protocol goes over statements I have already checked, and I bring the coffee cake. And Raymond, retired now, meets me after at the diner, and we talk about her the way old soldiers talk about a general. And me. I am 58, my roof does not leak, my Saturdays are strange and quiet, and over my kitchen table in a plain brass frame there hangs a check for $3.4 million, torn in 4 pieces, taped back together, stained in one corner with 50-year-old gravy, and stamped across the face in red bank ink, void. Never cashed, friends. Worth more to me than anything that ever cleared. People ask about it, the ones who do not know the story, and I tell them it is a family portrait, and I am not joking. That check is the truest picture of my family ever taken. Every hand it passed through told the truth about itself in under a minute. So here's what I know now, friends, all of it hers, handed to you the way she handed me the envelope. No test attached. The quiet ones at your table are not the poor ones. Half the time, they are just the ones who know what a spotlight does to people, so ask the quiet ones their story before the funeral instead of at it. Money is a fine servant and a terrible mirror, and you will learn more about your people with one torn check than with 20 smooth Thanksgivings. And whatever they hand you in this life, friends, if it is not yours, hand it back. Even when nobody is watching. Especially when nobody is watching, because somebody is always keeping a ledger and you want your name in the return column, and the interest on that entry, I am here to testify, compounds for 34 years and pays out all at once. Tell me in the comments about the quiet one at your table, the one everybody underestimates, because I read every single comment with my morning coffee under a taped together check, and I would love to add your quiet one to the record. If this story earned it, the like button is how you tell me. And subscribe with the bell, friends, because my mother left me a roll-top desk with more drawers than I have opened yet, and I am not speaking in metaphors. It is late now. The frame needs dusting, the tea is steeping, and the second bag is on the saucer for tomorrow, because some inheritances are $3.4 million, and some are habits, and I finally know which one is worth more. Good night from my kitchen to yours, friends. Mind your entries, and bring the pieces.